When we start to invest in stocks, one of the first questions we ask ourselves is how much money we should invest in the stock market. And the answer depends on many different things. Keep in mind that I'm not a financial advisor, but if you think about these things, you will realize that this is common sense. First of all, before I even go into more details, there is one thing that's not a question. It's not a question that you should have an emergency fund. This is cash you don't invest in anything. Not in stocks, not in bonds, not in real estate. An emergency fund is money to cover at least 6 or 12 months of your living expenses if anything happens. For example, you lose your job. You cannot go all in with your money, no matter how confident you are or how good is the investment. Now, there are 5 things you should take into account to decide how much money you should invest in stocks. First of all, it makes sense to think about what other assets you own. Do you own real estate, like your home where you live, or a home that you rent out? Do you own gold or bonds or maybe a farm? Do you have a car or maybe you have a small business? All these things have value that you need to take into account. For example, if you own a home that's worth $300,000 and you put $100,000 in stocks, you still only have 25% of your wealth in stocks. So take everything you own into account, write down their value and decide how much percentage you want to put into stocks. If you don't own any other assets, then it's probably not the best idea to put all your money into stocks. The next thing you need to think about is how confident you are about stocks. But let me make it clear what is confidence. Reading a tip on Reddit about a stock and putting all your money into it without knowing anything about the underlying company is not confidence. Confidence comes down to knowledge. It's about whether you know how to analyze the underlying company. Keep in mind that you cannot be 100% sure about anything. No matter how good of an investor you are, there is no such thing in life that is 100% sure. So it's completely normal if you are not 100% sure about something. But if you don't know anything about stocks, then you should only put the amount of money in it that you are willing to lose. Especially if you pick individual stocks. Because picking stocks without knowing how to analyze the business is not investing, it's gambling. Of course, you can make money with gambling in the casino, but you probably wouldn't put all your wealth on the roulette table. And of course, there is a way to invest in stocks without analyzing companies, buying passive index funds or ETFs. But I think people who are passive stock investors shouldn't put all their money into stocks. Today, the stock market is at record high. But not just the prices, the valuations too. The PE ratio of the market average is around 44, while historically it was always around 15. However, this is a market of stocks and not a stock market, which means that we can always find stocks that can be purchased at a reasonable price or even undervalued. So passive investors who only buy an S&P 500 ETF probably won't have very high returns on the ETF they buy today. I don't think that this high valuation that the market average has is sustainable. But the market can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. So we don't know if the market will go higher in the next months or it will go down. Nobody knows that. And this is why it's not a good strategy to stay in cash. Keeping your wealth in cash is a sure way to lose money. So if I would just start to invest in stocks today, I would probably not put all my money into stocks, especially in index funds. On the other hand, I was more confident buying individual stocks over the past months, because I always buy stocks that are undervalued with a margin of safety. So no matter where the market average is, I will probably have higher returns on these stocks than the market average. Obviously, your monthly income highly determines how much money you can invest in stocks. I think that stock investing should be a monthly habit, regardless of what your goals are. And the more money we invest today, the sooner we will reach our goal. For example, a passive income source to live off dividends. Of course, there are things that are essential in our life, things we need to spend money on, like food, electricity bills, clothes, transportation, but everything else is not essential. And I believe that it's much smarter to invest everything else instead of wasting our money on things we don't really need. So you should calculate the money you spend on essentials on a monthly basis and extract that from your monthly income. Now you have the amount of money you can invest on a monthly basis. And you probably already have a percentage in mind that you would like to invest in stocks based on what we talked about here. And if you have a huge pile of money to invest right now, maybe because you inherited it or because you just saved it for a long time without investing, I would divide that money and invest it on a monthly basis for the next 24 months. Because today is probably not the best time to put a huge amount of money into stocks. And you need to take into account if you are planning to buy something bigger in the next years. Maybe it's a car or a new home, although I think that a car is the biggest waste of your money. On the other hand, buying a home is not the worst financial decision unless the home is too expensive. So if you are planning to buy anything bigger in the next years, you shouldn't put that money into stocks. Stock market crashes are very rare and very short. They happen about every 10 years and they last less than a year on average. But always think about the worst case scenario. What if you put that money into stocks today and 2 years later you decide to buy a new home? You found your absolutely perfect home at a reasonable price and you are on your way to make the contract with the owner to buy the house, but the stock market crashes and all your stocks are in the red. That would be the worst time to sell your stocks because you would lose a lot of money on them. Especially because, as I said, market crashes are really short and your stocks will be probably at an all-time high within a year. Keep in mind that this is the worst case scenario, and I know people who keep everything in stocks regardless that they are aware of the worst case scenario. The decision is up to you, but it's always good to be aware of the possibilities.